Relationships are meant to be a space where both individuals can grow, support one another, and feel safe. However, sometimes we find ourselves in situations where one person's actions may cause harm, manipulate, or undermine the other. These harmful behaviors don't make someone inherently evil, but they do represent actions that are not conducive to a healthy, loving connection. The truth is, we all make mistakes, but when negative patterns become repeated and intentional, it's important to recognize them and set boundaries. Today, let's explore some of the warning signs that suggest someone might be behaving in a way that is toxic or damaging. These signs, when observed, can help us better protect our well-being and build healthier relationships. Vulnerability is one of the most human aspects of our experience. It is the place where our rawest emotions, deepest fears, and truest selves reside. When we open up to someone, whether in a friendship, a romantic relationship, or even a professional setting, we are inviting the other person to see us in our most authentic state. We are offering a piece of our heart, sharing what matters to us most, and hoping for understanding, empathy, and care in return. Unfortunately, vulnerability is not always met with kindness. In some cases, it becomes a tool of manipulation. Manipulation of vulnerability occurs when someone exploits your openness to control, belittle, or emotionally harm you. It's a tactic that erodes trust and exploits your need for connection. When someone manipulates your vulnerability, they use your most private feelings and experiences against you. Instead of responding with empathy and support, they twist your words, weaponize your fears, or leverage your weaknesses to create power imbalances in the relationship. One common form of manipulation is emotional blackmail. This is when someone takes what you shared with them, your insecurities, your fears, or your past, and turns it into a tool for getting what they want. They may threaten to use your vulnerabilities against you, make you feel guilty for being open, or accuse you of weakness for showing emotions. For example, imagine confiding in someone about a past trauma or deep insecurity. Instead of offering comfort or understanding, they might bring it up during an argument to undermine your confidence or attack your character. In this way, your vulnerability, which should have been met with support, becomes a source of discomfort or guilt. Another form of vulnerability manipulation is the gaslighting technique. In this case, someone who manipulates vulnerability will distort or deny your experiences to make you doubt your own reality. They may mock your emotions, dismiss your concerns, or convince you that your feelings are irrational or overly sensitive. For instance, if you express hurt over a behavior they've shown, they may minimize your feelings or insist that you're being too emotional, leaving you second-guessing whether your feelings are valid. This kind of manipulation creates confusion and insecurity, making it harder for you to trust your instincts and judgments. What makes this particularly damaging is that it often happens in relationships where we expect safety and trust. Vulnerability, by nature, is a leap of faith. We open ourselves up, trusting that the other person will handle our emotions with care. But when someone manipulates that vulnerability, they break that trust, often in ways that leave lasting scars. The emotional toll can be immense, as it leads to feelings of shame, confusion, and self-doubt. In some cases, people may begin to close themselves off emotionally, afraid of being hurt again. It's important to understand that manipulation of vulnerability is not about one-time mistakes or missteps. We all have moments when we are emotionally charged, but repeated attempts to exploit or control someone's emotions are a pattern of behavior that signals a serious problem. This is not about someone being difficult or challenging. It's about someone using their power to undermine your emotional security for their own gain. Recognizing this manipulation can be difficult because the person who is exploiting your vulnerability may initially seem caring or supportive. They may play the role of a confidante or show affection when it suits them, only to later betray your trust. The emotional manipulation is often subtle, creeping in slowly over time, which is why it can be hard to identify until you've already been hurt. They might even make you feel guilty for noticing their behavior, creating an environment where you second-guess yourself, wondering if you're overreacting or being too sensitive. So, how can we protect ourselves from this manipulation of vulnerability? The first step is awareness. Recognizing the signs of emotional manipulation, whether it's the twisting of your words, the exploitation of your fears, or the subtle undermining of your feelings, can help you build the awareness needed to create boundaries. If someone repeatedly uses your vulnerabilities against you, it's crucial to acknowledge this behavior for what it is: toxic and emotionally harmful. The next step is to trust your intuition. Often we ignore the gut feelings we have about a person or situation because we want to believe the best in others. But if something feels off, if you feel emotionally drained or unsafe after sharing something personal, it's worth taking a step back and evaluating the relationship. Your vulnerability is a sacred part of who you are, and it deserves to be met with respect and understanding. Finally, practice setting boundaries. When you share something personal, set clear boundaries around how you want your feelings to be treated. If you sense someone might try to use your vulnerability to manipulate or control you, don't hesitate to assert those boundaries and distance yourself if necessary. Protecting your emotional well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary for maintaining healthy, balanced relationships. If someone is unwilling to respect your boundaries, that's a signal to reevaluate the relationship. Ultimately, vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. It allows us to connect with others, build empathy, and form meaningful relationships. But in order for it to be a positive force in our lives, it must be met with care, respect, and trust. If someone is using your vulnerability to manipulate or control you, they are not worthy of your openness, and it's okay to walk away from that dynamic. Protecting your heart is an act of self-love and a necessary step in building relationships where both parties can thrive. This expanded point highlights the emotional depth of manipulation of vulnerability and offers boundaries are an essential part of any healthy relationship, acting as the invisible lines that help define our personal space, our values, and our emotional needs. They represent the limits we set to protect our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. In healthy relationships, boundaries are not just respected, they are honored. They provide safety, mutual respect, and a foundation for trust and understanding. Boundaries create space for both individuals to maintain their sense of self while also nurturing their connection with each other. However, when someone consistently disrespects your boundaries, it's a sign of a deeper issue that can have serious consequences for your emotional health and the relationship as a whole. When we speak of consistent disrespect for boundaries, we're referring to a pattern of behavior where someone regularly ignores, crosses, or violates the limits you've established, despite your attempts to communicate them. This behavior is not just a one-time mistake, it's a repetitive cycle of disregard that undermines your right to maintain your own sense of autonomy and safety in the relationship. It's a subtle but deeply harmful form of manipulation and control, as it creates an environment where your feelings, needs, and desires are secondary to the other person's agenda or desires. Disrespecting boundaries can take many forms, but it all stems from one central issue: a lack of respect for you as an individual with your own needs, values, and limitations. It's important to recognize that boundaries can be physical, emotional, psychological, and even digital. And just as each person is unique in their boundaries, how those boundaries are respected or violated can vary greatly. Physical boundaries. Physical boundaries are the most obvious and often the first ones people think about when considering disrespectful behavior. These boundaries include how we expect to be touched, how close we want someone to be, and our need for personal space. In a healthy relationship, these physical boundaries are communicated clearly, and both parties are expected to respect each other's comfort zone. When someone consistently violates these physical boundaries, it can feel overwhelming and unsafe. This can be as simple as someone repeatedly touching you in ways you've expressed discomfort with, invading your personal space without asking or pressuring you to engage in physical affection, hugging, kissing, etc. when you're not ready or willing. When these boundaries are disregarded, it sends a clear message that the other person's wants and desires are more important than your comfort and safety. Over time, this repeated disrespect can lead to feelings of anxiety, helplessness, and a deep sense of violation. Emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are just as important as physical boundaries, if not more so. These boundaries are the limits we set around our feelings and emotional well-being. They help us protect ourselves from being manipulated, drained, or emotionally overwhelmed by others. Emotional boundaries include things like how much we're willing to share, how much we can emotionally invest in others, and how we expect to be treated when we are vulnerable. When someone disregards emotional boundaries, they may repeatedly push you to share more than you're comfortable with, criticize you for your feelings, or make you feel guilty for expressing emotions that don't align with their desires. For example, if you're upset and share your feelings of hurt, someone with a consistent disregard for emotional boundaries might minimize or dismiss your emotions, saying things like, "You're overreacting," or "You shouldn't feel that way. This invalidates your emotional experience," and can make you feel like your feelings don't matter. Alternatively, they might emotionally dump on you without regard for your emotional state, expecting you to be constantly available to listen or support them without reciprocation. A compassionate yet firm stance on recognizing and addressing it in relationships. This disregard for emotional boundaries creates an imbalance in the relationship, where one person's emotional needs are prioritized at the expense of the other. Over time, it leads to emotional exhaustion, resentment, and a sense of being emotionally taken advantage of. Psychological boundaries. Psychological boundaries are related to our thoughts, beliefs, and mental well-being. They involve protecting ourselves from undue pressure, judgment, or manipulation. Disrespect for psychological boundaries might look like someone constantly challenging your beliefs, trying to change your opinions, or pressuring you to think and feel a certain way. This can also include gaslighting, where someone manipulates you into doubting your own thoughts, or sanity. For example, a partner who continuously mocks your opinions, belittles your achievements, or makes you feel inferior because of your thoughts and ideas is violating your psychological boundaries. Instead of respecting your individuality, they are attempting to mold you into their version of what they want you to be. This kind of disrespect can chip away at your self-confidence and leave you feeling confused and vulnerable. In today's world, digital boundaries have become just as important as physical or emotional boundaries. With a rise. In today's world, digital boundaries have become just as important as physical or emotional boundaries. With the rise of social media, texting, and online communication, it's essential to establish boundaries around how much you share and how much you allow others into your personal space online. When someone consistently disrespects these digital boundaries, they might overstep by texting you constantly without regard for your availability, invading your privacy by checking your messages or social media accounts without permission, or demanding responses immediately. This digital overreach can feel intrusive as it blurs the lines between personal time and relationship obligations. It can lead to feelings of being overwhelmed, stressed, and even trapped. When someone doesn't respect your digital boundaries, it demonstrates a lack of understanding of your need for personal space and autonomy, which is a red flag in any relationship. The impact of disrespecting boundaries. When boundaries are consistently disrespected, it creates a toxic environment that erodes trust, self-esteem, and the foundation of the relationship. It's exhausting to constantly have to defend your own limits, and over time, it can lead to a sense of hopelessness and frustration. You may start to feel like your needs are not important, that you're not being valued, or that you have no control over your own life. Repeated disrespect for boundaries is not something that should be ignored. It signals a serious imbalance in the relationship, one that is built on control, manipulation, or emotional disregard. The more someone pushes your boundaries, the more power they take from you, and the more they violate your sense of safety and well-being. How to protect yourself. Protecting your boundaries starts with recognizing when they're being crossed. The first step is to listen to your feelings. If you feel uncomfortable, anxious, or frustrated when someone disregards your boundaries, trust that feeling. It's a signal that something is wrong. The next step is to communicate your boundaries clearly and assertively. Let the other person know what you need, and don't shy away from expressing your discomfort when they cross a line. If someone continues to disrespect your boundaries despite you communicating them, it's essential to reassert those boundaries more firmly, and if necessary, distance yourself from that person. Lastly, be prepared to walk away from relationships that continually violate your boundaries. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, and if someone is unwilling to respect your boundaries, it's a clear indication that they're not invested in maintaining a healthy, equitable connection with you. You have the right to prioritize your well-being and protect your peace. Gaslighting is a term that has become more widely recognized in recent years, but it's a tactic that has been used for centuries to manipulate, control, and undermine individuals. The term originates from the 1938 play Gaslight and its subsequent film adaptations, where a husband manipulates his wife into doubting her sanity by dimming the gas lights in their home and then denying that the lights have changed. This subtle yet insidious form of psychological manipulation can leave the victim questioning their perception of reality, causing confusion, self-doubt, and emotional distress. Constant gaslighting is a more extreme and persistent form of this manipulation. It's not an isolated incident or a one-off occurrence, but rather a consistent pattern of behavior that erodes the victim's sense of reality over time. The person who gaslights is intentionally trying to make you question your thoughts, feelings, memories, and perceptions, all while presenting themselves as the voice of reason. The goal is to undermine your confidence, creating doubt and making you more reliant on the manipulator's version of the truth. When gaslighting is present in a relationship, it creates a toxic dynamic where the victim's emotional well-being is constantly under attack, and their sense of self is increasingly destabilized. How gaslighting works: the subtle and gradual manipulation. One of the most disturbing aspects of gaslighting is that it usually starts subtly. It's not always an overt attack on your perceptions, but rather small and seemingly inconsequential instances that, over time, chip away at your confidence and ability to trust yourself. A gaslighter will engage in behaviors designed to confuse and disorient you, creating a reality where they are always right and you are always wrong. Here are a few common methods used by gaslighters. Denial of reality: a gaslighter may outright deny things that you know to be true, no matter how concrete the evidence. For instance, they may deny saying something that you distinctly remember them saying, or they might act as though events didn't unfold the way you recall them. They might tell you that never happened or you're remembering it wrong, even when you have clear evidence or strong memories of the event. Over time, this tactic causes you to doubt your own recollection of events, making you feel uncertain about the truth. Shifting blame: gaslighters often use deflection as a tactic to avoid responsibility. Instead of acknowledging their role in an issue or conflict, they will shift the blame onto you. They might accuse you of overreacting or being too sensitive when you point out their hurtful behavior. For example, after an argument, they might say, "You're the one who started this fight," even if they were the one who instigated the disagreement. This shift in blame creates confusion and causes you to internalize the idea that you are the one at fault, even when you are not. Trivializing your feelings: a key part of gaslighting is minimizing or trivializing your emotions. When you express hurt or frustration, a gaslighter may dismiss your feelings by saying things like, "You're being too emotional," "You're overreacting," or "It's not a big deal." These responses make you feel like your emotional reactions are unjustified or excessive. Over time, this leads you to question the validity of your own emotions and whether they are acceptable to have. Using positive reinforcement to confuse you: sometimes, a gaslighter will alternate between gaslighting behaviors and moments of seeming kindness, which makes the manipulation even more confusing. After denying your reality or blaming you for something, they may offer compliments, affection, or gifts, reinforcing the idea that they're a caring partner or friend. This push and pull dynamic can cause the victim to question whether their negative experiences are real or just a result of their own overreaction. This confusion is intentional. It's designed to keep you emotionally off balance and dependent on the manipulator's approval. Undermining your self-confidence: the ultimate goal of gaslighting is to erode your self-esteem and sense of identity. A gaslighter will slowly and steadily undermine your confidence by making you feel inadequate, irrational, or incapable of making decisions. They may question your judgment, dismiss your thoughts, or suggest that you're not as intelligent or capable as you think you are. For example, if you suggest an idea or voice an opinion, They might say, "That's a ridiculous thought. Why would you think that?" These consistent attacks on your self-worth leave you feeling small, powerless, and unable to trust yourself. The long-term effects of constant gaslighting. Gaslighting, when it occurs consistently over time, has a profound impact on your mental and emotional health. It creates a toxic cycle where you begin to question everything: your memories, your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately your sense of self. The long-term effects of constant gaslighting can be devastating, and it's important to recognize these signs early on to protect your mental health. Self-doubt and confusion. As a result of constant gaslighting, you may begin to second-guess your own perceptions and experiences. You might start to question whether you're being too sensitive or if you're overreacting, even when you know something isn't right. This constant confusion leads to a breakdown of self-trust, which is one of the most damaging outcomes of gaslighting. Increased anxiety and depression. The emotional toll of gaslighting can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. Victims of gaslighting often feel like they are losing control of their own lives, and this lack of control breeds anxiety. They may feel trapped in the relationship, unsure of how to escape the manipulation. Over time, this anxiety can escalate into depression as the victim feels more isolated and unsure of their own worth. Loss of identity. One of the most insidious effects of gaslighting is the slow loss of identity. When you are constantly told that your feelings are wrong, that your reality is distorted, and that you can't trust yourself, it becomes increasingly difficult to know who you are or what you truly believe. This process of self-erasure leaves the victim feeling disconnected from themselves, lost in a fog of doubt, and unsure of their own desires or values. Isolation and dependence. As gaslighting erodes your self-confidence, you may find yourself becoming more isolated from friends, family, or support systems. The gaslighter often encourages this isolation, subtly or overtly distancing you from people who might offer support or counter their manipulations. This makes you more dependent on the gaslighter for emotional validation and support, deepening the manipulation and control. Erosion of trust in others over time. Constant gaslighting can lead you to question not only your own perception of reality, but also your ability to trust others. If you've been gaslit for long enough, you may become hesitant to share your thoughts or feelings with others, fearing that they too will dismiss your reality or manipulate you. This erosion of trust makes it harder to seek help or build new, healthy relationships in the future. How to recognize and address gaslighting. Recognizing gaslighting can be difficult because it often starts in small, subtle ways and builds over time. However, there are several key signs that can help you identify when gaslighting is occurring in your relationship. Pay attention to your feelings. If you frequently feel confused, anxious, or like you're walking on eggshells around a person, these could be signs of gaslighting. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it's worth exploring. Document your experiences. One way to combat gaslighting is to keep a record of events, conversations, and incidents that make you feel manipulated or dismissed. This can help you maintain clarity and give you a reference point when your reality is being questioned. Set boundaries. Gaslighters thrive on control and manipulation. By setting clear boundaries and asserting your needs, you can begin to reclaim your sense of self and protect yourself from further manipulation. Seek support. It's crucial to reach out to trusted friends, family members, or a therapist when you notice gaslighting behaviors. Speaking with someone who can offer an outside perspective can help you see the situation more clearly and provide the support you need to regain your confidence. Consider ending the relationship if the gaslighting behavior is persistent and unrepentant, and the manipulator refuses to change or acknowledge their behavior. It may be necessary to remove yourself from the relationship entirely. Your mental and emotional health should be your top. Constant gaslighting is a deeply harmful form of manipulation that can have lasting effects on your mental health and sense of self. It's a gradual, insidious process that leaves you questioning your reality, your emotions, and your worth. The manipulation becomes so ingrained that it can be difficult to recognize and even harder to escape. However, recognizing the signs of gaslighting, trusting your instincts, and seeking support can help you break free from its grip. It's important to remember that you are entitled to your own truth, your own experiences, and your own emotional reality. Gaslighting has no place in a healthy relationship, and you deserve to be in a space where your reality is respected, your feelings are validated, and your autonomy is honored. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is a fundamental aspect of healthy relationships, both romantic and platonic. It's what allows us to connect with others on a deep emotional level, offering support, comfort, and understanding when someone is going through a tough time. Empathy fosters kindness, compassion, and the ability to communicate effectively with those we care about. When empathy is present in a relationship, both individuals feel heard, valued, and emotionally supported. However, when someone lacks empathy and instead engages in emotional exploitation, the dynamic becomes harmful and toxic. Emotional exploitation is the act of using another person's emotions for personal gain, manipulation, or control, often without regard for their well-being. This kind of behavior is a clear sign of unhealthy and exploitative relationships. It's important to understand that while a lack of empathy can sometimes stem from personal issues or unhealed wounds, when it becomes a pattern, it signals an intentional disregard for the emotional needs of others. In the context of an emotionally exploitive relationship, this lack of empathy is used as a tool to manipulate, dominate, and wear down the other person. A person who lacks empathy may appear indifferent or uninterested when you're experiencing difficult emotions or going through a challenging situation. Instead of offering support or trying to understand your perspective, they might act as though your feelings are an inconvenience or even a source of irritation. For example, if you're upset about a personal issue, they might dismiss your feelings by saying, "Get over it," or "It's not a big deal." They may show little to no concern for how their actions or words impact you emotionally. This behavior can also manifest as an inability to recognize when you are hurting. A lack of empathy means that the other person is not attuned to your emotional state and therefore cannot provide the comfort or validation you may need. They may be emotionally unavailable, cold, or indifferent when you're seeking connection or understanding. Over time, this creates a rift in the relationship as one person feels ignored and invalidated while the other remains emotionally detached and oblivious. Additionally, a lack of empathy can lead to behaviors that put the emotional needs of others on the back burner while prioritizing the needs of the person with the lack of empathy. They may expect you to always be available to listen to their problems, comfort them during difficult times, or cater to their needs. But when it's your turn to lean on them for support, they remain indifferent, uninterested, or even dismissive. Emotional exploitation is more than just a lack of empathy. It involves actively using someone's emotions or vulnerabilities for personal benefit. When someone is emotionally exploiting you, they're often aware of your emotional state and will use it against you to manipulate or control you. The lack of empathy in this context is intentional. The person may take advantage of your kindness, trust, or vulnerability for their own gain, whether it's to maintain power, avoid taking responsibility, or avoid confrontation. One example of emotional exploitation is when someone manipulates your feelings to get what they want. For instance, if a partner constantly makes you feel guilty for needing space or for expressing your feelings, they may exploit your guilt to control your guilt, to control you into doing things you don't want to do. They might say things like, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me," or "I'm so upset that you don't care about my needs." In this case, the person isn't showing genuine care or concern. Instead, they are using your emotions as leverage to get their way. Another common form of emotional exploitation is using guilt or shame as a tool for control. A manipulative person might point out your vulnerabilities, past mistakes, or personal insecurities to make you feel small, ashamed, or unworthy. This is a particularly toxic form of exploitation because it preys on your deepest fears and self-doubts. It often creates a cycle of emotional dependence where the victim feels like they owe the manipulator something, whether it's love, attention, or validation. Because they are made to feel guilty for expressing any other need or emotion. Emotional exploitation doesn't always look aggressive or overt. Sometimes it can be insidious and disguised as concern, affection, or care. The manipulator might use flattery or love bombing to draw you in, only to later exploit your emotional vulnerabilities for their own benefit. They may also use emotional withholding as a tactic, offering affection or attention only when it serves their interests or punishing you with silence when you don't meet their demands. For instance, someone may withhold love, affection, or approval as a form of control. If you don't act in the way they want, they may stop showing affection, withhold intimacy, or give you the silent treatment to punish you for expressing your feelings or needs. This is a manipulative tactic designed to make you feel like you have to earn their approval by complying with their wishes. Over time, this emotional exploitation creates a deeply unhealthy power imbalance. The person who is emotionally exploiting you holds the reins of the relationship, manipulating your feelings to maintain control and keep you dependent on them for emotional validation. The victim, on the other hand, becomes emotionally drained, isolated, and confused, unsure of where their own feelings and desires end and where the manipulator's control begins. Recognizing emotional exploitation can be difficult, especially when the person involved is someone close to you, such as a partner, friend, or family member. Here are some signs that you may be in an emotionally exploitative relationship. They dismiss your emotions when you try to express your feelings or talk about your experiences. They minimize or dismiss your emotions. They may tell you to get over it or imply that your feelings are irrational, unimportant, or overblown. They make everything about themselves. A person who is emotionally exploiting you will rarely take the time to understand or validate your emotions. Instead, they constantly focus on their own needs and struggles, expecting you to support them without reciprocating. They use guilt to control you. If you're made to feel guilty for expressing your needs or taking care of yourself, this is a red flag. Gaslighting phrases like, "if you really loved me, you would," or "you owe me for everything I've done for you," are clear signs of emotional manipulation. They withhold love or affection in emotionally exploitative relationships. Affection or approval is often used as a bargaining chip. If the person withholds love, affection, or attention when you don't meet their expectations or demands, they are emotionally manipulating you. You feel drained, confused, and doubtful. Constant emotional exploitation can leave you feeling emotionally exhausted, uncertain, and disconnected from your own needs and desires. You might begin to doubt your own reality, wondering if you're overreacting or being too sensitive, when in fact you're being manipulated. They have no regard for your boundaries. People who emotionally exploit others often ignore or violate boundaries without regard for your comfort or well-being. They may pressure you into doing things you're not comfortable with or dismiss your requests for space, time, or privacy. Emotional exploitation can have profound and lasting effects on your mental and emotional health. The constant manipulation and lack of empathy erode your self-esteem, sense of self-worth, and emotional stability. Over time, you may begin to feel like your emotions don't matter, that your needs are unimportant, or that you are undeserving of love and respect. These feelings of worthlessness can manifest as anxiety, depression, and a lack of confidence. The longer you stay in an emotionally exploitative relationship, the harder it becomes to break free. The manipulative person will often create an environment where you feel emotionally dependent on them, and they will use this dependency to maintain control. This can leave you feeling trapped and powerless to change the dynamic, even though you know deep down that it's unhealthy. Recognize the signs. The first step in protecting yourself from emotional exploitation is to recognize the signs of manipulation. Trust your instincts and pay attention to how you feel in the relationship. If you consistently feel drained, dismissed, or unimportant, it's time to evaluate the dynamics of the relationship. Set clear boundaries, establish firm emotional boundaries, and stick to them. Be clear about your needs, desires, and limits, and don't allow the other person to manipulate or guilt you into compromising your emotional well-being. Seek support. Talking to friends, family, or a therapist can help you gain perspective and validate your feelings. Sometimes an outside viewpoint is essential for recognizing the unhealthy patterns in a relationship and finding the strength to take action. Practice self-care. Prioritize your emotional and mental well-being. Make time for activities that nourish your spirit, such as hobbies, exercise, meditation, or spending time with supportive people. Reconnecting with yourself can help you regain your confidence and self-worth. You know when to walk away if the emotional exploitation continues despite your efforts to set boundaries or communicate your needs. It may be time to consider ending the relationship. You deserve to be in relationships where your emotions are respected, your needs are valued, and your well-being is prioritized. A lack of empathy and emotional exploitation can create an unhealthy, damaging relationship dynamic that undermines your sense of self-worth and emotional health. This type of emotional manipulation is deeply harmful as it strips away your autonomy, replaces your needs with the needs of the exploiter, and leaves you feeling emotionally exhausted and confused. Recognizing the signs of emotional exploitation and setting boundaries is critical to protecting your mental and emotional well. Isolation and control are two of the most potent tactics used by manipulative and toxic individuals in relationships, whether they are romantic, familial, or even platonic. These behaviors are often subtle at first, but become increasingly aggressive and pervasive over time. When combined, isolation and control create a dynamic where the victim is emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically disconnected from their support system and dependent on the manipulator for validation, guidance, and a sense of self-worth. The goal of isolation and control is to make the victim feel cut off from their friends, family, and other support systems, ensuring that they rely on the manipulator to fulfill their emotional and psychological needs. The manipulator creates a situation where the victim feels alone, vulnerable, and unable to make decisions independently. This form of coercion isn't always obvious at first. There may be no explicit demands or actions, but instead, a gradual erosion of the victim's connections, independence, and sense of autonomy. Isolation and control are two of the most potent tactics used by manipulative and toxic individuals in relationships, whether they are romantic, familial, or even platonic. These behaviors are often subtle at first, but become increasingly aggressive and pervasive over time. When combined, isolation and control create a dynamic where the victim is emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically disconnected from their support system and dependent on the manipulator for validation, guidance, and a sense of self-worth. Isolation and control are two of the most potent tactics used by manipulative and toxic individuals in relationships, whether they are romantic, familial, or even platonic. These behaviors are often subtle at first, but become increasingly aggressive and pervasive over time. When combined, isolation and control create a dynamic where the victim is emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically disconnected from their support system and dependent on the manipulator for validation, guidance, and a sense of self-worth. The goal of isolation and control is to make the victim feel cut off from their friends, family, and other support systems, ensuring that they rely on the manipulator to fulfill their emotional and psychological needs. The manipulator creates a situation where the victim feels alone, vulnerable, and unable to make decisions independently. This form of coercion isn't always obvious at first. There may be no explicit demands or actions, but instead, a gradual erosion of the victim's connections, independence, and sense of autonomy. How isolation and control unfold in a relationship. The process of isolation and control often begins in small, seemingly inconsequential ways, making it difficult for the victim to recognize the manipulation. It might start with an innocent comment or concern, such as the manipulator questioning why you spend so much time with certain friends or family members. Over time, these small remarks turn into more controlling behaviors, including limiting who you interact with, where you go, and what you do, all in the name of concern or love. Here's how this gradual process often plays out. Undermining social connections. The manipulator may begin by subtly criticizing the people you're close to. They might say things like, "Your friend is so needy, your family doesn't understand you," or "They're just trying to keep you from me." They create a narrative that paints your friends and family as unsupportive, toxic, or even a threat to the relationship. This tactic is designed to make you question your relationships and ultimately distance yourself from those who could offer you emotional support. Guilt and pressure. If you do try to spend time with friends or family, the manipulator might use guilt to control your decisions. They might say, "You never have time for me anymore," or "I don't feel good when you're out with them." These comments are intended to make you feel guilty for seeking emotional fulfillment outside of the relationship. Over time, you may begin to feel like you have to choose between your loved ones and the person who is trying to control you, often choosing the manipulator out of fear of upsetting them or facing their anger. Monitoring and surveillance, in some cases, isolation and control take the form of excessive monitoring. The manipulator might ask where you're going at all times, text or call you constantly to check in, or even show up unexpectedly at places you've mentioned. They might demand to know who you're talking to and what you're doing, framing their actions as signs of love and concern. This constant surveillance takes away your freedom and autonomy, and it makes you feel like you're always being watched or judged. Creating dependence. As you are increasingly isolated, the manipulator will work to make you more dependent on them for emotional, financial, or social needs. They may encourage you to rely on them for validation, support, or decision-making, ensuring that you feel like you cannot function without them. This creates an unhealthy dynamic where you no longer trust your own judgment or sense of self, and you rely on the manipulator for your sense of security. Gaslighting and doubt. The manipulator may gaslight you during the process of isolation and control, making you feel crazy or irrational for questioning their behavior. They might tell you things like you're imagining things, or you're being paranoid. When you bring up concerns about their controlling tendencies, this creates confusion and self-doubt, making it harder for you to see the manipulation clearly and ultimately causing you to doubt your instincts. Reinforcing isolation. Once the manipulator has successfully isolated you from others, they will use this isolation to reinforce their control. With no one to turn to, the victim becomes emotionally. In conclusion, isolation and control are insidious tactics that can slowly erode our sense of self, independence, and autonomy. What begins as seemingly harmless concern or affection can, over time, transform into a stifling and toxic dynamic where our ability to make decisions, trust ourselves, and maintain healthy relationships is compromised. It's important to remember that no one has the right to isolate you from your support system or control your choices. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and the freedom to grow as individuals. If you find yourself in a situation where isolation and control are becoming patterns, it's crucial to seek help, set boundaries, and remember that your value does not depend on the approval or manipulation of anyone. You are deserving of love that respects your autonomy, of relationships where your voice is heard, and of a life where you feel empowered to make decisions for yourself. The journey to reclaiming your freedom and self-worth may be challenging, but it is always worth it. Remember, you are not alone, and there is strength in seeking support, setting boundaries, and standing firm in your truth. So let's choose to nurture the relationships that lift us up, celebrate our individuality, and support our growth. Let us protect our emotional well-being and never allow anyone to undermine the power of our voice, our autonomy, and our worth. Thank you.